Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Jessica Pierce, and I'm actually leading your training tonight on the effects of childhood trauma. So we'll go ahead and get started. I did go ahead and mute everyone, but if you have a question at any time, by all means, you can put it in the chat box or you can just unmute yourself and ask a question. I'm totally fine with that. I'm used to answering questions during training, so not a big deal. A little bit about me before we start. Right now, I'm currently a center director at Right Steps Child Development Centers in Lafayette, currently at the Creasy location. And then new to me, I actually am also going to be a faculty member at Ivy Tech Community College in their early childhood department. So teaching a couple of courses here and there. So that's exciting because that's new. And yeah, so we'll get started. And again, if you have any questions, just let me know. You should still be able to hear me, but I'm going to go ahead and take my video off so I don't have to see myself. So if you see me disappear, that's why. Okay. So many children and adults suffer from chronic adversity and trauma that TCCRN and I, or the Child Care Resource Network, and I thought it would be such an important topic to talk about, the effects of childhood trauma. We as a community can make a difference to change the trajectory of a child's life, whether you do that with your own child, your grandchildren, students, if you're a teacher, if you're a therapist, children that you're working with or families that you're working with. Really, you can make an impact by building warm, positive relationships with anyone that you come in contact with, even as an adult. And so it's just such an important time too to talk about these things and how we can help. So one of my favorite quotes when talking about trauma is this quote by Dr. Karen Purvis. You cannot lead a child to a place of healing if you do not know the way yourself. I just love it because in order to really help children and other adults, even with trauma or some type of like toxic stress or adversity that they've experienced, we really have to make sure we are in a good place first. I know that if I'm not in a good headspace, I'm feeling frustrated or grumpy, I'm not as able or adept to help others with their emotional struggles if I'm not in a good place myself. So it goes the same for the rest of us. We kind of have to know how to help each other with those experiences. But we have to start, internally. So just a few basic definitions before we go really into the training. So when I talk about trauma, I'm talking about a deeply distressing or disturbing experience, possibly emotional shock following a stressful event or a physical injury, which may be associated with physical shock and sometimes leads to a long-time neurosis. And again, maybe just a physical injury. And then when I talk about adversity, I talk about any kind of difficulties or misfortune that someone might experience in their life. So again, before we can really dig into what happens when there's trauma, we're going to talk about the different parts of the brain that are affected or impacted by trauma. Again, the more we know, the more we can help ourselves, the more we can help others. So the more information we have about the brain and how it works and how it's affected, the more we can target the specific areas to help overcome trauma and things that we've experienced. So this model of the brain is called the triune brain because it's made up of three main parts. So there's the cortex, the limbic system, and the brainstem. And so it's important to know that each part plays a vital role in how our brain functions and how it operates. Each part has its own specific function that we're going to talk about a little bit more on each slide. But, why do we need to know all of this? Because again, the more we know, the more we can help ourselves heal and again, then help our children. I'll probably say that a lot, but it's because I'm really passionate about it. I work a lot with my own children on trying to help them understand the names of the different parts of their brain, as well as what they do and how they can help fix it. So your brain stem is in control of vital functions. So it's the only part of the brain that is fully developed at birth. It controls our breathing, our heart rate, our pulse, our temperature, and our balance. This part of the brain is sometimes referred to as the reptilian brain. And this is because its purpose is survival. So if you think for a second, did you just breathe? Are you sure you just breathed? Did you have to tell your lungs, okay, lungs, now breathe? No, you didn't have to do any of that. It was just automatic. And so that's because your brainstem is responsible for those things. It knows that you need to take a breath in order to survive. So you do it automatically. Your eyes and other senses take in information or other sensory stimuli, and that triggers a response in the brain, such as fight, flight, or freeze. And this could be to real or perceived threats. So you don't necessarily have to have a real threat. It could just be you think something's going to happen, so it's perceived, and that could cause, your pulse to increase, your heart rate to go crazy. You may, start breathing really quickly, and all of those things are just because of the, image or sound that you perceive to be threatening. Then you have the limbic system, which is the middle part of the brain. And this part of the brain is next to develop because the brain develops back to front and bottom up. And so it's also sometimes referred to as the midbrain, because again, it's in the middle. It also can be referred to as the mammalian brain, and it's the feeling or emotional part of our brain. The limbic system includes a few different parts, such as the hypothalamus, the amygdala, the pituitary gland, the thalamus, and the hippocampus. And again, the purpose of this system is feeling. So it thrives on relationships, feelings of safety, and positive emotions. The emotional brain triggers emotions that motivate behavior. And the amygdala is the sensor or the alarm system that scans for cues of danger or interest, triggers emotions, and stores important events into long-term memory. And then last to develop is the cortex. That's responsible for reasoning and learning. The executive functions are also located in the prefrontal cortex. And the interesting part about this part of your brain is it's not actually fully developed until mid-20s, even early 30s. And they're saying, especially for men, it's usually early 30s before this part of the brain is fully developed as new research comes out. And so that means, so any of us who are dealing with someone younger than that, so especially our children, their brains are not fully developed. The part, when we're asking them why they're doing something, why won't they stop doing something? Why do they continue to do what we ask them not to do? They may not be able to answer that because they don't have access to that part of the brain, especially if they're upset or having a meltdown. They really cannot answer those questions. And so, to be honest, too, many of our young educators, many young workers or employees, they're still also, growing that part of their brain and helping it fully develop. So we have to think about that too in terms of people we're working with. So just as a review, the prefrontal cortex is fully developed late 20s, early 30s. If you think about where that's located, if you put your right hand to your forehead, this is where you think and learn. That's that part of the brain. So try to help you remember prefrontal cortex, where I think and learn, right on your forehead. And then the thalamus, which is again located in that midbrain, is what controls your sleep and processes information. So it's just two lobes of gray matter tucked away that process sensory information and control sleep. And then the hypothalamus is really small, about the size of an almond, and is located beneath those two lobes of gray matter. But they control the major motor systems and the hormonal and nervous systems. So basically, its job is to make sure everything is at homeostasis, so everything's balanced. And then amygdala, again, I said that was the alarm. So that's constantly scanning the environment and sensory input saying, am I safe? Is everything okay? What's going on? How do I respond? And new research actually says that when a child or a person is experiencing stress and overstimulated, unable to respond, that their hearing actually shuts off. So if you really have ever thought to yourself about your child, are you listening to anything I'm saying right now? No, honestly, they're probably not, because they really can't hear you. Especially if that part of the brain shuts down hearing, then they really can't hear you. And that might be why sometimes, especially when they come out of a meltdown, They seem confused. It seems like you just weren't talking to them. They're like, what's going on? Because, again, if their hearing shut down and then they're also emotional and their eyes are closed, really that's two senses that are missing during that time. So it takes them a minute to figure out where they're at in their own body and space. And again, memories with strong emotions tend to stick, whether those memories are happy or sad. And the amygdala plays an important role in forming new memories, so especially those related to fear. And then last but not least, the hippocampus is for storing learning and memories as well. It's the most compromised due to chronic stress. It can't store things when they're too memorized, and it shrinks when it's too overwhelmed. It can grow back, which is awesome to know because, we can do things to help that. But again, so if you think a child's not listening to you, they can't remember what we just talked about, that is exactly why that part of the brain is shut down. So an easy way to think about it, whether or not you're regulated or calm state or you're dysregulated, same with your child, you can use this hand model of the brain. So regulated is, you have your thumb on the inside and your fingers over the top. And then dysregulated would be if your lid has flipped. So for example, you've lost your cool, you slammed the door, you started yelling. Anything like that would be when you flipped your lid and your emotions are exposed and you're not really using that rational thinking part of the brain. If you search hand model of the brain on YouTube, there's a really good video where they kind of explain that and talk about it. And they even recommend using that model with children to help them understand their brain and what it means when they flip their lid. So now we're going to talk about trauma and adversity. So how does this impact the developing brain? So this picture is a picture of the stress response system. So the black pathway is the pathway where you take in a stimulus from outside. So you either see or hear something, in the way it moves through your brain. So it goes through the thalamus, then it goes to the prefrontal cortex, and the amygdala, scanning to make sure everything's okay. But when you experience trauma or a traumatic situation, or your brain has experienced so much adversity that part of your brain isn't working the way it should, or your amygdala is perceiving everything as fearful when really it's not, because again, perceived threat is just as impactful and sometimes even worse than a real threat. It doesn't go through the prefrontal cortex anymore. It skips right through that and goes and leads to an external response. So again, that could be fight, flight, or freeze. So again, just depicting, like I said earlier, you really can't even get to the prefrontal cortex if there is chronic stress and adversity. It doesn't even go through that path. There are three main types of stress. Positive stress is brief increases in heart rate and mild elevations in stress hormone levels. So this could be anything from the first day of work or school, moving, a child getting shots, or making a speech in front of the class. The next type is tolerable stress. This is serious, temporary stress responses, but I didn't mean to stop that. But it's buffered by a supportive relationship. So this could be a loss of a family member or a pet, but you typically have somebody there with you to help you through it. It could be a natural disaster or sustaining a bad injury. The last type of stress is toxic stress. This is prolonged activation of stress response systems in the absence of a protective relationship. This could be witnessing domestic violence in the home, chronic neglect, adverse childhood experiences, increased prolonged financial hardships, or living with an addict. Could everyone hear that okay? I probably should have asked before I let it play. Hopefully you don't think I was just sitting here in silence. But if you could just send me a quick yes in the chat box, or, okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. I just, technology doesn't always work the way I want it to, so just making sure. Okay. So which type of stress is the most damaging? Toxic stress. Our brains cannot take unpredictability, chronic adversity, isolation, and restraint. So again, when those things happen, so whether you're being physically or emotionally or mentally restrained in some manner, your brain's going to struggle with that. Also, being alone. Again, our brains are social organs. They heal and grow and learn from being around others. And so when they're not, that really can cause a lot of issues. And then the brain's way of protecting itself is by shutting down the prefrontal cortex, which has to deal with our trauma. So again, it's not going to think about the trauma rationally. It's going to just shut down and not have to think about it at all. So if any of you have never heard of adverse childhood experiences, there's so much research on that. It's a questionnaire that you can do to figure out what your ACE score is, or your adverse childhood experience score. And basically, the higher the number, the more trauma you've experienced, and that can lead to, again, later poorer outcomes. Like I said, there are things we can do. Our brain can heal, our brain can grow. That's the awesome thing about the brain. But if you haven't seen this before, I encourage you to Google it. There is a woman named Nadine Burke Harris. She's a pediatrician, and she has done a lot of work with children who have experienced ACEs. She's written a few books. The Deepest Well is a really good one. I just finished not that long ago. But she also does a TED Talk on YouTube that's really good, that talks a lot about it. And so I'd encourage you to go look that up. And I will type her name really quick in the chat box in case you are a visual learner and need to see it. And her book is called The Deepest Well. I think she has more than one, but that's the one that I read most recently. That's really good. So I'm going to just give you a second if you want to look at this screen. There are a total of 10 questions. So this is the first 5. And again, you're just going to give yourself 1 point for any of these things that were done. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. Again, this is being recorded, so if you don't get a chance to get them all, I believe the link will be sent to you afterwards with the recording, and you can always look at it. But again, if you just Google it, it'll pop up with a PDF for you to print and fill out too. Okay. So then the next set of questions. So again, it's important to take this survey for yourself to answer the questions about your own childhood, to know where your ACE score is. But then when you think about your children too, you can think about things that they've experienced in their life and know what their ACE score is. And I know that could be really hard to see or hear, but again, the great thing is that there are many things we can do to help our children overcome trauma and adversity that they've experienced. And even if it's not our own children, but children we know that are experiencing it, you guys are all taking the first step by learning more about it. So that's awesome. And then you can learn how to help, things to do. I didn't put my email on the slide, so I'll put that in the chat box too really quickly. And I have so many resources and information that if anyone wants to reach out afterwards, you are more than welcome to. And I can, assist if I know the answer. If not, I will find someone that does. Okay. We're gonna move on. So now we're really going to talk about, okay, so we have childhood trauma. We know the ACE score either as ourselves or our children. So what does that mean? What's going to happen now? So just a few statistics about trauma and things that have happened to adults that have had trauma. Studies report that between 75 to 93% of youth entering the juvenile justice system annually are estimated to have experienced some degree of traumatic victimization. So they've experienced some kind of trauma. Incarcerated women were almost twice as likely to report a history of childhood sexual or physical abuse compared to those that are not incarcerated. Almost half, so 4.5, 5 out of 10 of those that were pregnant as a teenager have had a history of childhood sexual abuse. A study of individuals in an inpatient alcohol detoxification unit found that 81% of women and 69% of men disclosed a history of sexual or physical abuse. A study of obese patients participating in a weight loss program found that 55% of them acknowledged some form of childhood sexual abuse. People who experience violence as children, including physical and sexual abuse, are more likely to drop out of high school. So girls, that's 24%, and boys, that's 26%. Between 66 and 90% of women in the sex industry were sexually abused as children. So again, those numbers are really high. Also, if you're looking at your ACE score and you're thinking, wow, that's kind of high, there is a lot of research that says many people have at least one ACE. When they first did the ACE survey, they did it, with a group of educated men, and they, were at different levels of income status, but mostly higher. And they found that the same thing, 60, 70 or more percent of men had at least one of those men had at least one ACE or more. So it is very common, even though we don't want to believe that it is or don't want to think about it. We don't want to talk about it. Before I started the session, I was talking with Sarah from TCCRN, and we were just talking about, it's such a needed topic to talk about. But unfortunately, it's kind of taboo to talk about trauma. Thankfully, I think it's becoming more and more okay to talk about it, but we still don't want to talk about it as children. We don't want to, talk about how much it's happening as children, because usually it takes us until we're adults to talk about it. So it's a much needed topic. Why is this so important? This is so important because adverse childhood experiences lead to a wide array of later negative outcomes, including depression and anxiety, bipolar disorder, eating disorders, poor executive function and decision making, which can lead to substance abuse later in life. The increased number of ACEs leads to greater increased risk for negative health outcomes. Children who experience severe trauma before age 16 are at 3 times more likely to develop schizophrenia later in life. Nearly 50% of people with 4 or more ACEs develop chronic depression. Don't panic if you had a high ACE score yourself. We will explore later in this session some strategies and tips to change the way your brain reacts to stress. So as you can see from the graphic, the more ACEs you have, the higher the risk. So especially if you have 4 or more ACEs, then the risk is even greater. Why is this so important? Ooh, we don't want to hear that again. So here's another graphic about childhood trauma. So what researchers have found is that prolonged exposure to stress and adverse experiences damages the way the brain functions. And the consequences continue long after the stress and experiences are over. So again, I talk about this a lot at my center, because we get a wide variety of children. And so, especially, I think it's hard for us to remember or think about if a child's been adopted, even adopted from birth, that those impacts from, utero when the mom was pregnant, as well as, delivery, if that was traumatic in any way, there was any kind of substance abuse, that still stays with the child, regardless of, they're adopted into this new family. They have a much better opportunity for life now. It doesn't change or take away the fact that those things happened. And so, again, we can help change the brain in the way it functions, but that reptilian brain, so the part that is developed at birth, again, is developed at birth. So that all happens in utero. So whatever, mom experienced while she was pregnant makes a difference for that child as well. So when we're exposed to situations our brains perceive as life-threatening, our bodies prepare for fight or flight. Our bodies release cortisol, which is the stress hormone, so that we can get the energy we need to either escape. So again, that's the flight response. So whether you physically leave, so you try to run away or leave the room, you walk away, or you shut down, you leave the conversation, you're no longer participating. Or we are going to encounter the threat, so we're going to fight. Again, it could be physical, lashing out, hitting, kicking, biting, or it could be screaming, yelling, verbally attacking or fighting. It doesn't necessarily have to be physical. And then there's also freeze, where we just completely shut down, deer in headlights, don't know what to do, just that is another option. So imagine you're walking in the jungle and you encounter a tiger. We recognize the potential for danger and our body releases cortisol so we can fight the tiger or run from it. This rapid mobilization of your body's resources is critical for human survival. But when a threat occurs over a long period of time, or our brains and bodies continue to prepare for flight or fight, even after the threat is over, then you have the makings of potentially getting post-traumatic stress disorder. The heightened state of arousal manifests as hypervigilance, anxiety, and even agitation. So memories or external triggers can stimulate the response. So merely just thinking about it, thinking about being alone with a tiger in the woods, can cause your body to release cortisol. So if you've experienced a traumatic event and you think back on it now, sometimes, the hair on your arms will stand up, you'll get goosebumps, you get a chill thinking about like what could have happened when you experienced that situation. And your body's also releasing cortisol. And so when it occurs in children, it's far more devastating because a chronic stress response alters the child's development. Their brains and bodies grow differently as a result of living in those situations perceived to be unsafe or maybe overly abusive or neglectful. This is one difference that's led researchers to draw the distinction of post-traumatic stress disorder from developmental trauma disorder. So when traumatic exposure occurs during critical periods of a child's development, the very core of that person is being altered. For an example, a child who is sexually abused by his or her stepfather from ages 7 to 11, their entire sense of the world and themselves is kind of turned upside down by disorienting and terrifying the experience. Children survive unthinkable abuse by accommodating to the abuse in a way that changes them developmentally. So they develop with feelings of fear, distrust, shame, defeat, and resignation that shape their self-concept. So maybe instead of being a confident child that speaks out and, says what they want or what's on their mind, or they speak up when they feel like they're being treated not fairly or unequally to a peer. If they've experienced some type of abuse or neglect, or they've had to learn to accommodate to those situations, that might change their whole personality type. They may become withdrawn, they may become shy and quiet, they may feel fearful to speak out because, again, if they spoke out about maybe what was happening, the situation could get worse for them. So they change their whole concept and being. They anticipate and expect trauma to reoccur, and they organize their relationships around the fear of abandonment or victimization. So in their mind, in their heart, the further abandonment and shame they feel may prevent them from telling people what's happening. Again, that's why we need to make sure, we're talking about it if it's happening, or, if a child's telling us that it's happening, we're listening and trying to help them work through it, do whatever we need to do to help them through that situation. Because again, not talking about it is what makes people feel shameful. It makes them feel embarrassed. Speaking from my own experience, I went through some pretty traumatic experiences with an ex of mine that I was with for 6.5 years. And, I was college educated. I had a good career. It was one of those things where I was like, this is not happening to me. This can't be happening to me. I would never let this happen to me. I would never let this happen to my children. But in reality, it was happening. And so definitely once I learned to speak out about it, and I did, it made me feel better. And then I learned there are ways to, help the children through that as well. So instead of, pushing fear away, let's try to do what we can to, make people feel comfortable to talk about it and help them work through it as well. We live in a time, unfortunately, where the media is ever so present, whether it's on social media, at our fingertips with phones and devices, or it's on the news. Stories of childhood sexual abuse is in the news almost daily. And, there's lots of scandals or famous people that have had abuse that is in the media. But unfortunately, even though those cases get lots of attention, many people are struggling with abuse by family members. Not just sexual abuse, but whether, again, it's neglect or emotional abuse, or a parent is addicted to drugs. A lot of the things are happening either at home or with close relatives. So even though we see it being portrayed in the media, maybe by somebody they knew versus family, a lot of times it does happen more often with family. According to the National Association of Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, there are more than 42 million survivors of sexual abuse in America. And when you include other types of abuse and neglect, those numbers grow even greater. We're a society filled with individuals who have been altered negatively by our childhood experiences, and the outcomes for those affected by childhood abuse and neglect are generally not positive. So there is a new call to action to see child abuse as a public health issue. Again, we are seeing more and more children affected by trauma than maybe some of the typical things that we would see. So, for example, ADHD is a common one that children are diagnosed with. And while they may have symptoms of ADHD, or it may really look like it's ADHD, if you talk to the family and talk to the child and they're open with talking about some of the things maybe that have happened, we have learned, or research is learning, that sometimes it's actually symptoms of trauma. So they're working really hard to get, trauma as a label, as a diagnosis, so that we can more effectively treat it as well. So thinking about that, if we reconceptualize obesity and addiction epidemics, we see around us every day as having their origin in untreated trauma. If we look at the root cause of our unhealthy behaviors, we may be in a better position to address the issues. One of the reasons that the outcome of child abuse, specifically sexual abuse, is so dire is that it relates to the fact that victims have largely suffered in silence because of fear and the stigma. So our reluctance as a society to face the issue has prevented people from getting the support they need to heal. And so again, in order to reverse the effects of ACEs on people's health, we have to think about the way our schools, healthcare facilities, and even law enforcement agencies think about maladaptive behavior. So what most people who have specialized in trauma have learned is that those who need the most help are usually, or sometimes, the most difficult to help. And if you think about what they've experienced or what they've been through, it can be hard for them to trust, outside individuals, especially if someone close to them who is supposed to be, that caring for them or helping them learn and grow is the root cause of the trauma. And again, trauma, like we learned on the slide in the beginning where we talked about what trauma is and what trauma isn't, different situations for different siblings could even be traumatic. So, for example, a divorce between two parents, and if there's issues between the parents co-parenting, that might affect one child more than it affects the other child. It might be more traumatic for one than the other. And so thinking about that, that might be why too. Sometimes it seems, we all went through the same things, but why do you struggle more than I do? Well, those different events maybe happened at different ages for those children, or just the way that experience, was perceived by the child was different. And so individuals with histories of childhood sexual abuse do not typically disclose the abuse until much later in life. Again, not always, but sometimes with physical abuse, other people can catch that based on the signs. So with sexual abuse, that's not as often because again, sometimes that's done, more secretively. There's not necessarily marks that can be visibly seen just by looking at a child. So that's why often it's, much later in life. And by the time, we get in the hands of professionals, we may have already engaged in behavior that was self-destructive, dangerous, or addictive to cope with what happened. So again, depending on the age of onset and the severity of the trauma exposure, they could already be developmentally altered. So it's important that if you know you've experienced trauma, you not only help yourself, but you also help your child too. So this is just a pyramid of what happens when you experience adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. So again, at the bottom, you experience that. Again, if it continues or you have a high ACE score, that could lead to disrupted neurodevelopment. So again, it could disrupt the way your brain is shaped. You may perceive things as threatening when they're not. For example, if you hear something in the middle of the night and you have a history of, abuse or something happening, every little sound could automatically send your body into panic mode or fight or flight mode because that one sound triggers you to remember something that happened and you haven't dealt with it yet. So that could be something that leads to disrupted development in your brain because your amygdala is perceiving a simple sound as life-threatening when it's not. Then that could lead to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. The more closed off you become, the more you struggle with relationships, the harder it's going to be socially and emotionally to interact with peers, especially for children. Unfortunately, children are cruel. Even in elementary school, I have 2 children currently in elementary school, and simple things as, not even wearing the right boots. Children, you can't be in my group because you're not wearing brown boots today. And so especially if you've experienced some kind of trauma, you already get scared really quickly or easily by things that have happened, or you jump into fight mode every time something happens. It's going to be really hard to form those relationships. And again, our brains are social organs, so they need those relationships to survive. Then you might adopt healthy or health risk behaviors. So whether it's substance abuse at an early age, being promiscuous at an early age, drinking at an early age, any of those things could happen. Then if those things continue to happen, that leads to disease, disabilities, and social problems. And then unfortunately, it can even lead to early death. So what happens when a child has a high ACE score or experiences toxic stress? As you can see from the picture in the right-hand corner, it isn't good. Trauma and adversity literally changes the shape and function of our brains. Our amygdala processes emotional sensory information more rapidly and less accurately. Their brains may be in a constant state of survival, meaning that they are always on edge or high alert. It's just trying to keep them from further pain or rejection. The brain is not reacting to the world, but instead making predictions and constructs of all of our experiences of the world. Traditional methods do not work with these children. Consequences and rewards do not work well. These children may be attachment challenged because they have upset and negative feelings that truly never die, but are buried alive at the deepest level of their memory. Anger is typically what we see. However, it's fear's bodyguard. So what I mean by that is you might see a child lashing out, being angry, screaming, destroying things, throwing things, scratching, biting, but it might be that they're scared. They might be scared that they're going to be abandoned, scared of how you're going to respond, scared of what might happen next. Children thrive on predictability and routine. So if that's not happening, they really could just be scared of what's going to happen next. And rather than saying, I'm scared, I don't know what's going to happen, or I'm anxious, I don't know what's going to happen next, their body responds with behavior instead. So we're going to move on to a little bit happier part of the training. While I love talking about this topic, it can, kind of bring us down a little bit because there are such negative outcomes. But the most important part of this training, if you take anything away, is yes, that there are negative things that can happen, but there's also positive things that we can do after trauma has been experienced. If you have a buffer, so if you experience trauma, if you can think of a person that you're like, yes, like I'm so happy I had this person. I wouldn't have made it through without them. For me in my challenging time, it's my family. If I didn't have them, we know I wouldn't be where I'm at today. So, thinking about I had such a strong buffer to those relationships that I was able to still, make it through and achieve what I've achieved now. So thinking about your children, you're here, you're doing this training, so they have you. You are an advocate for them just by taking this training to learn more, how you can help. And so you could be that relationship again, like I said at the beginning, that changes their whole life. They may experience, toxic stress or trauma, but you are there to help them and help them learn and grow in, an appropriate way, help them learn appropriate coping mechanisms. So another quote that I love when talking about trauma is, a child who is out of control needs the calm reassurance of someone who's in control. So again, that goes back to what I've said probably 5,000 times, and you're probably tired of hearing. But we can't help a child if we don't help ourselves first. I know my youngest child tests me the most. And if I'm not in a calm state, I'm frustrated with her behavior or I'm upset at what she's doing, I need to take a minute to calm down first, because it's just going to make it worse if I am frustrated at her in the moment. If you are experiencing that same type of thing with your own child, they say wait 90 seconds before you respond. And then that moment or that strong feeling will subside a little bit. You may still be upset, but you're able to respond in a better state of mind if you wait just 90 seconds. So only a minute and a half, just take a couple deep breaths, wait a second, and then respond. And it's likely going to help. I practice that quite a bit, or at least I try to. So this is a quote from one of the articles that's located in the resources section, but it says, how is it possible in a safe, developed society like America that our children are coming out of childhood in a similar state to those who have gone off to war? Honestly, I think I probably meant for the slide to be up a few when I was rearranging them earlier today. But basically, there is a link. So most Americans are familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's a condition that typically affects like veterans or people who have been exposed to terrible violence. It used to be referred to as war neurosis or shell shock. But unfortunately, many children are coming out of their childhoods with similar conditions that fit the clinical profile for post-traumatic stress disorder. So growing up in environments with instability, abuse, neglect, impoverishment can create stress and trauma that looks like PTSD. And affect development. So again, I meant that to be earlier before we talked about, when we talked about the not happy things. So going back to the happy things, we can do a lot of things to help our children learn and grow and help their brains become more resilient from the trauma they've experienced. One particular type of thing we can do is called focused attention practices. And so if you're looking for more information on focused attention practices, Dr. Lori Desautel, she's a professor at Butler, but she's written, I think, 5 or 6 books now that, again, have a lot of information. Her current book that she just finished, Connections Over Compliance, has a lot of these resources in it. and you can get it on Amazon. The cover, it's blue with a brain on the cover if you go to look for it. But focused attention practices calm and soothe our limbic brain. So again, that's that midbrain emotional part of the brain, and our sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible again for fight or flight or freeze. And they allow access to the parasympathetic nervous system, which relaxes the body and helps us return to homeostasis through deep breathing and movement. Deep breathing is crucial to supporting people and accessing this part of their brain. And your breath is the best calming technique. Really, if you can teach even children at a young age to take a deep breath, whether it's you taking a deep breath with them and telling them what you're doing or having them try it themselves, that's going to be the best foundation for helping them overcome trauma and adversity. And some other quotes by Donna Jackson. She also has written some books about trauma, are on this slide. Her books are a little bit more scientific in nature. They have a lot more terminology that I had to look up when reading, and even had to read 3 or 4 times to fully understand what I just read. So if you're looking for a more scientific read, this is probably where you would want to look. So one focused attention practice is belly breathing. So you can lie down on your back or sit straight up with your hands on your belly as you take in deep breaths through your nose and out through your mouth. And again, you want to make sure, I'm going to turn on my camera just because you can see me, because I'm doing all these silly things in my office by myself and you can't even see me. So you can, sit up nice and tall. You want to make sure that you're not, breathing with your shoulders. You want to make sure you're really breathing with your belly. You can put your hands on your belly to make sure. Again, if you're doing it with young children, you can have them lay on the ground and give them a stuffed animal and put it on their belly so that they can see the stuffed animal go up and down. It's a nice visual way to help them learn to take a deep breath. Another type of breathing is called box breathing. So you breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and breathe out for 4 seconds, then hold for 4 seconds, and repeat. And you can even trace the box in the air for each breath as shown. This is a great thing to print and even, put in a child's room or have, in your purse. So when you're out somewhere and you're like, okay, you need to breathe, here's your box, practice breathing. The more you use the visual, the more they'll get used to it, and then that you can move away from using the visual. So there's also sphere breathing. So if any of you have seen these spheres, they're really awesome way. They're really fun to play with. We have a few of them at the center. I have a few at home. But we're going to watch this little boy take a deep breath using the sphere.
Good. Blow your air out. Good. Breathe the air in your nose. And blow out. One more.
So again, it's a nice visual way to see them. We're going to breathe in. And just slowly stretch it out, and then you're going to exhale and close the ball. So they might have to just play with it a little bit first because it's new and exciting, but once you do that, they'll be able to use it to take a deep breath. There is also hang 10 breathing. This one always takes me a minute, so give me a second. So you're going to make the hang 10 sign with one hand, and then you're going to cover your left nostril with your pinky finger and breathe in. So you're going to... But then you're going to, when you breathe out, you're going to switch and cover your right nostril with your thumb and breathe out. And move your hang 10 to your left hand and your right thumb on your nose. So then when you breathe, it's going to look like this. And just being able to get the different sides of your body moving while you're breathing, again, is going to help you kind of come to that calmed, relaxed state. Then there is 6-second breathing. So take a deep breath with a 6-second inhale while reaching your arms over your head. So you're going to breathe in. And then counting backwards from 6, you're going to bring your arms back down. So pretty simple, self-explanatory. And these are good for you and your children. So, you can do them with your children and show them how. Then there's object breathing. So placing a light object such as a cotton ball on your desk or in the palm of your hand. You can put it in the palm of your hand for your child. And you're going to inhale through your nose and exhale out of your mouth. And as you breathe out, you need to control your breathing enough to move the object. If you wanted to make this more of a game, if your children don't really want to do it, or they do it really well, so you want to see how well they can control their breath, you can make a path on a table or a desk and then have the object have to go through that path, or you could just do a straight path and see if you can get it past the finish line. Paper football breathing is another technique. So you can make a paper football and use your breath to move the football down the field. You could also play against someone or do it alone at your desk, and you could keep score. Another option is color breathing. So you can breathe in your favorite color and breathe out a worry. So when you breathe in, you're going to think about that color, think about what that color looks like, think about what that color would look like in front of you, or if you were that color, what it would look like. And then when you breathe out, you're letting that worry go. Bubble blowing. We know children love to blow bubbles. And while it's easier to get a bubble machine, having them use the wands to learn to, take a deep breath and blow the bubbles out, and to be patient, to blow slowly to get the bubble to come out. And then also they could pop the bubbles while taking a deep breath. There are so many symbols online if you look up breathing images. This is another one called the infinity symbol, or the infinity breathing symbol. So you're going to hold your tongue. Ooh, it's been a long day. Hold your thumb about 10 inches away from your face and create an infinity symbol in the air with your thumb slowly. So follow your thumb with your eyes, taking in a deep breath. And blowing it out as you go. You can also use the symbol again, like I said earlier. Doodling. Doodling is another way to calm your brain. I've done a lot of training and I've learned some people just need to doodle, but they're still paying attention. They're still listening. It's actually regulating for them to doodle. Bilateral scribbling is a great way for children to help calm down, especially if they're really angry. So basically they're just going to hold, objects in both hands and scribble across the page or paper or chalkboard, whatever they're scribbling across. Again, you can get that midline movement, but just doing that helps calm their brain. Some other strategies, you can use a fidget, you can journal, listen to music, breathing exercises, going for a walk, taking a shower, dancing. Another fun hand movement, a couple of other fun hand movement activities you can do is if you, on one hand, you're going to put your forefinger and your thumb together, and on the other, you're going to do your thumb and your pinky, and you're going to touch each finger individually as you go, and then go back the other way. And you can even see like how fast you can go, and then see if you can keep that pattern or if you end up on the same finger on both hands, because sometimes that'll happen. You'll accidentally end up going the same way with both hands. So that's kind of fun to see if you can do it. Might be too hard for children depending on how old they are. And then another one is if you make a peace sign with one hand and like an O with the other, and then you switch. So I had to think about that one for a second. So peace and a circle, peace and a circle, and just now I'm trying to do that, but just keep going back and forth. When I first learned these strategies, I would sometimes do those in the grocery store when it was a little overwhelming taking all 4 kids grocery shopping. I'd just be walking along, moving my fingers because no one really knew what I was doing, and it was helping me calm down so that I wasn't overwhelmed in the grocery store with 4 kids. So it's something simple you as an adult could do as well. And then here's the resources I used, and I know we're almost out of time. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Thank you guys all for coming again and listening to me talk for this last hour. Again, trauma is something I'm passionate about, so I have a lot of resources if you are looking for more.
Thank you so much, Jessica. This was so helpful and informative, and interesting, and something that I know as a professional and personally will benefit me. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me come talk.
Good night, everybody. All right, Tanika.
I was like, so are they gonna stay?
I'm like, are you guys gonna leave? Or that was great.
Yeah, it was.
That was
good.
great. And we got some good numbers, and
Yeah, Jess is good at what she does.
yeah.
So I didn't expect anything less. And I actually am, I will probably be in it. I don't know when they start. I think it's next year again. She actually took a course with Lori I can't pronounce her last name, but anyway, the lady she was speaking of from Butler.
Okay.
She actually took a course, and well, she has a certificate, I think it is, in something with neuroscience. And so I was actually supposed to do it. Yeah. I was actually supposed to do it starting just this summer, and I just had a lot of other stuff happening. And so I was like, yeah, I better wait. I'm not gonna do it right now. But I can't remember how many credit hours it was that she took through Butler, but she actually has a certificate in neuroscience, something. It's something, whatever with the brain. She has a certificate in there. So she's really done a lot of work on that area. So I know she'd know a lot of the information.
Awesome.
So the reason I asked you if you could stay on, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it, is because I wanted to show you in Zoom, and I'll do it. And it's something that me and you can work through together. But I did want to just show you, like, as far as how we go in and count the people.
Okay.
But I'm feeling like, can you make me a co-host?
Okay.
I feel like maybe that's why I'm not able to do it. I don't know.
Okay.
Did it make me a co-host?
Uh-huh.
Okay, I didn't see anything on here. At which shit, Sarah.
Would it be possible, Tanika, to do this tomorrow?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm tired. I think I'll be a lot more like on it tomorrow.
Yeah. Tomorrow in the morning, I am thinking probably around.
I've got a coalition meeting. I've got some program stuff in the morning. Would
you know what?
Anytime after 11:30.
Yeah, that actually is fine. I've got a call at a 0 to 3 webinar that I'm on at 2 o'clock. So
do you want to just say 12?
Actually be fine. Yeah, 12 should be fine.
Okay,
can you do me a favor, and on our calendars, I actually don't know how to do it. so that we can share calendars. I don't always update mine, so I guess it's really not a big deal. But I try to put my stuff on there. I'm
Okay.
gonna send you an email
Okay,
to try, that should allow us to, let's see, share calendars.
okay. Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking that we should do is figure out how to send that survey out. Especially
Okay.
because I think this was a good workshop to get survey responses from.
The one that Jess just did.
Yeah,
I mean, the survey that Crystal talked to us about yesterday.
yes, yes.
Yeah. Yep, that's fine.
So we'll
And I-
do how to count and register, or not register, but like get them entered or whatever. Whatever data entry we need to do for the participants,
Oh,
and then
uh-huh.
figure out the survey.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds great.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
All right, have a good night.
Uh-huh. All
All
right.
right, bye.
Bye.